Hello my friends. In my last video I'd done a little glowy barrel effect on one of these cutie little squats, and I wanted to try and finesse this effect a little bit more with another attempt that basically spiraled into a full diorama build instead. So here's what happened with that.
Swamp Rat Miniatures.
Now, I thought I'd use some Imperial Guard bits to test this effect, since we have a lot of leftovers from our ongoing Imperial Guard builds, and in the interest of continued kit bashing escapades, I thought I'd whip up my own little custom bolter autocannon hybrid, as I do like the main body of the bolter but not so much its stubby little barrel, which is basically the Warhammer weaponry equivalent of a pug. So all I did for this was cut off the heftier autocannon barrel and transplant it onto the frame of the heavy bolter, giving me this really cool looking Warhammer Browning 50 cal sort of thing. Then I scraped out the intake port on the side of the weapon and snipped off a small belt of bullets from this older heavy weapons team accessory. I bent it around a bit so it would look a bit more natural when it stuck into place in the slot we just dug out, and shoved the whole thing down onto a regular old tripod. And for such a quick and easy kit bash, I was actually loving how cool this thing looks. Some of the weapons in 40k are a bit bulky and ugly, but this looks like a nice sci-fi 50 cal that would fit in well with the existing Imperial Guard stuff. And because of how much I liked it, it felt rude to just use it as a test dummy and sling it in the bin. It deserved at least a small build to call home. To get this build started, I whipped up one of my usual kind of display based things and began layering up some foamy terrain. I wasn't entirely sure what I was building towards here at first, but I liked the little raised section I'd made and thought it'd be cool to use as a firing platform. So I made a bunch of miniature planks by roughing up some coffee stirrers, glued those down into place, and shoved in some matchstick trimmings to tighten up the gaps. I've been watching a lot of grand designs recently, and since that basically makes me a qualified architect, I decided to add some slightly spiraling stairs going up to the platform. I also whacked down a little makeshift parapet over here in case anyone wants to peek over the edge or just sit down for a quick tea break, and then I gave our kitbash 50 cal pride of place on the platform. I'd basically accepted this was transitioning into another trench build at this point, so I thought it, I'll chuck on a few milliput sandbags to start adding a bit of reinforcement around the firing position, and before they'd cured, I stuck some matchsticks into them to act as fence posts and snipped them down to a more reasonable length so they'd be ready for the barbed wire. I've got two different gauges of this, and I looped the thicker gauge wire into some nice little coils, which I wrapped around the fence posts to secure it. I then used my thinner gauge stuff to add some straighter lengths of wire and finished it all off with another final layer of the coiled up stuff to get a really nice tangled look going on. In real life, I'm basically a little mole man because I love digging holes, so I dug one out here to add some interest to the terrain and satisfy a small part of my earth burrowing fantasies. Then I slopped on our usual homemade mud mixture to cover up the foam and add some texture. The build was looking pretty good by now, but there were a few too many empty spaces, you know. I like my battlefield scenes to feel a bit more cluttered and busy, so I added a bunch of little miscellaneous Imperial Guard greebly bits, the majority of which I'd casted myself using green stuff. This did make them slightly wonky, but that won't matter too much once it's all painted. I also decided to add some discarded belts and bullet casings to help sync up the battlefield scene with the glowing barrel effect I had planned, and these were made using thin strips of sandwich bag ties and some styrene rod clippings. The observant ones amongst you may notice a small issue with their placement, so comment down below if you know what it is, and if you're right, you will win half a grapefruit. That's all of our physical building work done now though. I think we've come up with a decent little scene that will do justice to our big boy 50 cal, so it's onto the painting. Like most of my dioramas, I'm starting off with a brownish base coat for all the mud, and also the wood to make painting that a bit easier later. And I'm using a nice burnt umber colour today as I wanted quite a dark earth tone. I hit the sandbags with their usual kind of sandy beige colour, and then for the wood, I did my usual build up of scratchy wooden texture with a variety of brown colours, focusing some lighter ones along the edges and the bits that will get most worn out. I gave the sandbags a quick bit of stippling for some texture, coloured the ammo crates in green, and then hit both pieces of weaponry with a mid-grey colour, as I decided somewhere along the way that this was going to be a winter scene, and grey would be my wintry camouflage colour for any weapons and armour. I hit any remaining metallics, including the barbed wire, which was an absolute pain in the nutsack to paint. It was just really fiddly and annoying trying to get good coverage on it. Then I gave those green and grey items a very quick highlighting to help them stand out a bit more, like a goth at a Teletubbies convention. It was then time to add a whole lot of grime and gnarliness into the scene, starting with a simple wash onto the mud first, then move into some streaking grime on most of the painted details. This stuff is a must-have for battlefield scenes like this, as it makes everything look all battered up and well used, and if streaking grime is the peanut butter, then dirty down rust is the jelly or the jam if you're British, coming in as a nice second layer and a great way to add a corroded look on all your metal details. The final bit of painting for the scenery itself was the discarded links and bullet casings, which I'd left till the end as I wanted them to stand out and be visible still, and not get all muddied up with our washes and grime we just added, and for such a simple addition I was really happy with how these came out. So now it was time for the glowing barrel effect, and spoiler alert, I wasn't entirely happy with how this came out in the end, but I'd started off with a solid white base layer followed by a mixture of orange and yellow fluorescent paints to start building up the brightest colour on the hottest part of the barrel. A thorough piece of research consisting of me looking at the very first picture I saw on Google showed that the hottest part would be somewhere along the last third of the barrel length. So once I'd placed that, I started layering up some orange and red fluorescent colours on either side to try and build up a bit of a heat transition. When I felt that it was looking okay, I added a bit of a dark brown glaze into the areas that wouldn't be as hot, like the thick rings around the heat fins and the tip of the muzzle brake. Then I finished off with a tiny bit more glow around the ring on the tip, like the old red ring of Sting after too much spice. And like I said, it didn't come out quite as good as I hoped. I still haven't perfected it, and it doesn't help that my blends are about as smooth as some 80 grit sandpaper, but it looked alright if you look at it from a distance. I had an idea about taking the effect one step further with some steam or smoke drifting out of the barrel from the heat, and I did this by just dabbing in a bit of super glue, then attaching some cotton wool. I fluffed this stuff out and removed quite a lot of it as I wanted it to be quite subtle, and I think I actually removed a little bit more off camera after I'd added all the snow and everything else, as the bits on the side were still looking a bit too thick at that point, but yeah, it kind of works I think, so we'll go with it. Now for the miniatures, I didn't need to do any major posing changes this time, as the first one was the gunner from the heavy weapons team box, and he matched up with the 50 cal already, and the second one just needed a tiny bit of green stuff in to make the mismatched pieces work for his stepping up onto the parapet pose. The painting was also relatively straightforward. I don't think I've ever actually painted any kind of winter gear like this on soldiers before, so I was pretty much making it up as I went along, using Apothecary white contrast paint for the fatigues, and that same mid-grey I'd used earlier for the armor plates. The remaining blank details got touched in with the usual kind of bog standard colours you can expect to see anytime I paint up Cadians, and then I came back to the armor, which I gave a very light washing in the recesses for some definition, followed by some scratchy little edge highlights to make it pop. I also highlighted the fatigues using a plain old matte white colour, and I actually really liked how these turned out. The Apothecary white definitely did most of the heavy lifting, but I was surprised with how non-shit they looked in the end. After that, it was just a case of highlighting up the levers, which I wanted to keep quite dark to contrast with the fatigues and the armor. Then I hit the skin with a quick and easy set of highlights and dotted in some tiny little eyes. This guy has a helmet cover on, so I thought I'd give that a bit of extra pizzazz with a little winter camo pattern, just using some different greys and some whites, and the miniatures were looking pretty good now for my standard of painting. And I actually really like the winter paint scheme on the Cadians, so I may have to crack out a unit of these in the future for myself. But for the actual diorama we're building, they looked a little bit too clean and not like they're freezing their balls off, so I gave them one final touch with some white pigment powder to make them look all frosty and cold. That seemed to work reasonably well, so I stuck our frosty boys down into place on the diorama and used a little bit more of that pigment around the weapons and the ammo crates and whatever else to add an initial and subtle layer of frostiness. I followed that up with some much less subtle AK interactive snow effect around the edges of the diorama mainly, kind of leaving a pathway from where our standing soldier is up to the firing platform to make it look like these guys are trudging back and forth, and I finished that snow effect off with a sprinkling of the snowy micro balloon stuff. I have no idea why it's called micro balloons, but it works really well for giving the snow a much more powdery and fluffy natural appearance, and I added a bit of this on top of the fence post too, which may have been my favourite touch on the whole build for some reason. The very final thing I did was squirt a bit of this dirty water puddle effect stuff into the hole by the ammo crates, with the thought process being here that all the hot casings have melted the surrounding snow and caused a dirty runoff of water. And with that, my friends, everything was finished, so it was time to see how it turned out. So there we have it. What started as me just wanting to test out a glowing barrel effect has turned into a whole diorama build instead. And we had a mixed bag of successful and not so successful elements in this video, with all of them being learning points for next time. I think the glow effect looks okay, but still not quite where it needs to be, so you might see me play around with that more in future builds, and you'll definitely be seeing more snowy winter builds now that the weather's getting colder than an Arctic fart, as it just feels right. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. I've got a bunch more stuff like this on my channel and much more to come in the future, so let me know down below what you think of the build and how I can improve it for next time, and also let me know what your ideal ratio of milk to cereal is. For now though, as always, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.